Hello, friends. Have you ever had one of those moments where your mind is so certain about something and your heart follows right along, only for life to quietly whisper, "Not quite"? Well, today I want to share a little story with you. It happened a few years ago, on an ordinary afternoon that turned into something I still smile about whenever I remember it. You see, it was one of those slow, golden afternoons where the sun hangs lazily in the sky and the air smells faintly of warm pavement and blooming flowers. I had just finished picking up a few groceries from the little market down the road. Nothing special, just bread, some apples, and a small carton of milk. I remember holding that paper bag against my hip, walking carefully because my knees had been a bit stubborn that week. Now, when you get to be my age, you start recognizing people in familiar places. The lady at the bakery, the young boy who delivers newspapers, the man who always walks his dog near the park. Faces become little anchors in your daily routine. And that afternoon, as I stepped out of the market, I saw someone standing across the street. My heart gave the tiniest little jump because I thought I recognized him. "Robert?" I remember whispering to myself. Robert was an old friend of mine. Well, not just a friend, really. He had been my neighbor many years ago, back when the trees on our street were still small, and my children were running around the yard, chasing each other. Robert used to sit on his porch in the evenings with a glass of iced tea, always waving whenever someone passed by. He had the kindest laugh, deep and warm, like it came from somewhere steady inside him. But Robert had moved away nearly 15 years before that afternoon. We had lost touch, like people sometimes do when life pulls everyone in different directions. Still, the man across the street looked so much like him. Same gray hair, same tall shoulders. Even the way he stood, with his hands loosely resting in his pockets. For a moment, it felt like time had folded in on itself. Without thinking too much, I crossed the street. I remember feeling oddly excited, like I had just discovered a little piece of the past waiting for me on a busy sidewalk. My steps were slow, but my mind was racing through memories. I was already imagining the surprise on his face when he saw me. I even rehearsed what I might say. "Robert, is that really you after all these years?" When I got closer, the man turned slightly, and the sunlight caught his face in a way that made my heart absolutely certain. "Oh my goodness," I said out loud before I could stop myself. "Robert!" The man looked up, and friends, I walked right up to him with the biggest smile and said, "Robert, I can't believe it's you. Do you remember me? It's Mabel from Oak Ridge Street. You used to live right next door." Now the man didn't say anything for a second. He just blinked a couple of times, looking at me with the kind of polite confusion you might see on someone's face when they're trying very hard to understand what's happening. And then, very gently, he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I think you might have the wrong person." Well, I tell you, in that moment, my face felt warmer than a cup of fresh tea. I looked at him again, really looked this time, and suddenly All the tiny differences came into focus. His eyes were a different color. His voice wasn't quite the same. The smile was kind, but it wasn't Robert's smile. I had mistaken a complete stranger for someone I once knew very well. For a brief second, I felt embarrassed, the way you do when your mind runs ahead of reality. I laughed softly and said, "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. You just looked exactly like an old friend of mine." And do you know what that man did? He didn't rush away or look annoyed. Instead, he smiled in the warmest way and said, "That must have been a very good friend." There was something about the way he said that, calm and sincere, that made me pause. So I nodded and said, "Yes, he really was." We ended up standing there on that sidewalk for a few minutes, talking like two neighbors who had known each other for years. I told him about Robert, how he used to fix everyone's broken fences, how he brought over homemade lemonade in the summer, and how he once spent an entire afternoon helping my youngest son build a little wooden birdhouse. The stranger listened patiently, smiling every now and then, as if he could picture it all. At one point he said, "You know, it sounds like he left quite an impression." And that's when something quietly shifted inside me, because I realized that for all those years, I had been carrying those memories around without really thinking about them. Life gets busy. Time moves on. But that simple mistake, thinking a stranger was my old friend, had suddenly opened a door to all those warm little moments again. It felt like being handed an old photograph you forgot existed. Eventually, the man glanced at his watch and said he needed to head off. Before leaving, he gave me a friendly nod and said, "I'm glad I reminded you of someone who mattered." And I said, "So am I." We went our separate ways after that. I walked home slowly, groceries still tucked under my arm, but my mind was somewhere far back in time, on a quiet street with young trees and porch lights glowing in the evening. Later that night, I found myself sitting by the window, thinking about how strange and beautiful life can be sometimes. One small misunderstanding, one familiar face in a crowd, and suddenly a memory you hadn't visited in years comes back to sit beside you. I never saw that stranger again, but I'll always remember how kindly he handled that moment. He could have brushed me off or laughed awkwardly. Instead, he gave me a few minutes of patience and let me remember an old friend out loud. And you know, that meant more than he probably realized. Sometimes people enter our lives for years. Sometimes they stay for just a few minutes on a sidewalk. But even the briefest encounters can leave a little warmth behind. So the next time you think you recognize someone, or when a memory suddenly taps you on the shoulder, take a moment to appreciate it. Our lives are stitched together with these small, unexpected threads. And who knows, maybe somewhere out there, someone is remembering you with the same kind of smile. Well, my dear friends, that's the little story I wanted to share with you today. If something like this has ever happened to you, maybe you mistook someone for an old friend, or a stranger reminded you of someone special. I would truly love to hear about it down in the comments. And if you enjoy sitting here with me on the porch, listening to these simple stories from life, don't forget to subscribe and come back again soon. There are always more memories waiting to be told. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and don't forget to wave at the familiar faces along your path. You never know what memories they might bring back.